The Fujifilm X-M5 was one of my favorites to come out of 2024, but it made me wonder, what would a more photography-focused version of that camera feel like? That's where the X-T50 comes in. So I reached out to Fujifilm and they sent me a loaner to test out for a month, so huge thanks to Fuji for making this comparison possible. Now, this is a bit of an odd comparison. The X-T50 is more closely comparable to the XS20, which I've got a video on linked below. However, due to the similar styling, I think a lot of people will end up comparing the X-T50 to the X-M5. In terms of build quality, at first glance, both cameras feel really similar. If I didn't know better, I think they use the same body with a different top plate, but they're not identical. The X-T50 has a beefier grip and a much better thumb rest, making it much more comfortable to hold, especially if you're pairing this camera with larger lenses. I also found the button placement of the X-T50 was more ergonomic and more comfortable to reach. All that being said, I was worried the X-T50 would feel noticeably larger on a strap, but that's not really the case. The X106, the X-M5, and the X-T50 are all pretty close in size, especially when paired with smaller lenses. With larger lenses, the X106 is obviously more compact, but that's a whole nother conversation. If you're interested in the X100 series, I'll link my videos on the X100V and the X106 below. One of the biggest physical differences between these two cameras is the screen. The X-T50 has a tilt screen, while the X-M5 has a fully articulating flippy screen. This is where you really start to see the split between photography and videography between these two cameras. For photography, a tilt screen is great. It's my preference. It makes framing shots easier, it doesn't get in the way when you're shooting, and it feels more solid. But if you're shooting video, you'll want the flippy screen of the X-M5, especially if you're vlogging, that way you can monitor yourself much more easily. Another thing I noticed, on the X-T50, I accidentally kept turning the film simulation dial, and this wasn't an issue for me on the X-M5. On the other hand, I prefer the joystick placement of the X-T50 over the X-M5. Both camera bodies have their pros and cons. I think it's important to look at the pros and cons of each and figure out what features you can live without and what features you absolutely must have when choosing between the two. So, how do both these cameras handle photography? Well, they both take great photos, but as expected, the X-T50's 40 megapixel X-Trans5 sensor gives you more resolution to work with. This is really useful if you like cropping. I like to crop my shots in a 2:1 or 16:9 ratio, and having the extra resolution makes a huge difference compared to the X-M5's 26 megapixel sensor. You just get a lot more resolution, especially when you crop down. The X-T50 also has a built-in flash, which the X-M5 lacks. If you're carrying the camera daily and using it for photography, that flash will definitely come in handy, especially if you're out with friends. When you don't need the highest quality, but you definitely need the extra light, I really enjoy having a flash for situations like that. In terms of color science, I actually noticed a difference, which surprised me because usually I feel like I don't. The X-T50's X-Trans5 sensor leans slightly cooler, a bit more blue, compared to the X-Trans4 sensor in the X-M5. Normally when I edit my photos, I actually cool down my shadows a bit. With the X-T50, I actually found myself warming them up slightly, so just keep that in mind. I'm not one who usually notices these color shifts. However, if you are using recipes on this camera, most of the newer ones compensate for this difference, so you can still get similar results. Fuji X Weekly suggests this color shift is more processor related, but since the X-M5 and the X-T50 share the same processor, I think it's more of a sensor difference. That being said, it's really not a big deal, and both cameras take amazing photos, despite the little differences in color science. Now, speaking of recipes and film simulations, the X-T50 has the clear advantage here. While both cameras have the same simulations, the X-T50 gives you 7 custom film simulation slots, where the X-M5 only gives you 4, which you also have to share with the custom video modes. Not sure why Fuji made this limitation, but it is what it is, so if you're planning on using film simulations and recipes, the X-T50 is definitely the choice I'd go for. And of course, the X-T50 has an EVF, which makes it much more appealing to photographers. Personally, I don't rely on EVFs as much as some other people. I shoot with the rear screen a lot, but having an EVF when I need it is really nice. It's really up to you to decide how important an EVF is. Personally, on an everyday camera, I can live without it, but if I'm planning on doing more professional work, I tend to like having an EVF a bit more. Like I said, it's really a personal choice for you to consider. Now, let's talk about video. This is where the X-M5 really shines a bit more. The 26 megapixel sensor in the X-M5 handles rolling shutter much better than the X-T50. The flippy screen and vlog mode make vlogging and self-recording much easier, and the X-M5 also has built-in directional mics, which can improve the on-camera audio. You can also attach Fuji's cooling fan to the X-M5 for longer record times, which is something you can't do with the X-T50. That said, the X-T50 does have more frame rate and resolution options, but personally, I think the video options on the X-M5 are more than enough for most people. And if you're buying a camera primarily for video, I think the X-M5's vlog mode, flippy screen, better rolling shutter performance make it the better choice over getting a couple extra resolutions and frame rates you probably won't need and will never use. Now let's talk about one of the bigger differences between these two cameras, IBIS. The X-T50 has in-body image stabilization, while the X-M5 doesn't. For photos, IBIS lets you use slower shutter speeds without introducing shutter shake or blur, and for video, IBIS gives you handheld, smoother footage. The X-M5 does have electronic stabilization, but it's not really as good as a true IBIS system. Personally, I don't think IBIS is the end-all be-all. It's really nice to have, but I don't know if it's a make-or-break feature for me. It's up to you to decide how important IBIS is for you when you're purchasing between these two cameras. So, which camera is better? This is where things get complicated. I still think the X-M5 is one of the best value Fujifilm cameras out right now. The price to performance ratio is really hard to beat. The X-T50 is a great camera with great specs, but at the time of filming, it costs $400 to $500 more than the X-M5. And at that price, you're getting close to X-T5 territory, which makes the decision tougher. So here's my take. If you want a budget-friendly camera that punches above its weight class, the X-M5 wins. If you're a dedicated hobbyist photographer, the X-T50 is a great choice, but I'd also consider a used X-T5. If you're new to photography, I'd recommend going for the cheaper X-M5 and using the money saved on something like a better lens or accessories like a camera bag or a good tripod. That will last a lot longer. Between these two, there's no real winner, because they're designed for different users. It all comes down to your needs. For me, personally, I have a hard time picking the X-T50 over the X-M5, just because the X-M5 is such a great value. But if money isn't an issue and photography is really your priority, the X-T50 is a fantastic camera that photographers will appreciate more. If you want IBIS and an EVF for video, you might also want to check out the Fujifilm X-S20, which I've got a video on linked below. So overall, I feel like the X-T50 is a bit expensive for what it offers, and the X-M5 could be priced a bit higher. I would have loved to see Fuji include IBIS in the X-M5 and increase the price slightly, but make it a much better camera, and remove it from the X-T50, where it's not as essential, and bring the price of the X-T50 down. This would have created a bigger distinction between the X-T50 and the X-T5, while making the X-T50 a better value and increasing the value of the X-M5. Of course, I'm not the manufacturer and it's not my decision to make. This is just some of my thoughts on the two cameras. So, which are you going to go for? Are you going to go for the X-M5, which is cheaper with a better value, or the X-T50, which is more expensive with a couple more features, but may not be worth that extra price? Let me know what you think down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. For now, whatever you choose, go and shoot some photos. Thanks for watching.